Well, it's time for part 4 of our Starry Sky Watercolor Stars tutorial. This session we're going to be doing our stars, and for me this is the most fun part of the whole painting. So you're not going to need a whole lot of supplies. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's get ready and let's have some fun. Well, to start out, we're going to use 2 brushes, but only one to actually paint with. I'm going to be using the smaller round brush. I'm going to use the smaller round brush to paint. The bigger round brush I'll be using to help create the stars, and we'll show you in a minute how that works. I've got 2 kinds of paint here too. I've got both the white watercolor and I've got acrylic, and I use both of those, and you'll see why as we go through the process. A little clear water, got my baby wipes, and we're ready to go. But before we actually do our painting, I'm going to take that and put it out of the way. We're going to do some practice because doing these stars can be a little bit of a challenge if you've not tried it before. So we're going to use some just some black drawing paper, and we're going to make a actually kind of a sky field of our own here just on the paper, just to get the feel for how to create these stars. When I do the stars, I don't draw them in, or I don't paint them in one by one. It gives it a very artificial look. You want more of a random look for stars, and so we're going to use a tapping technique where I'm going to fill the smaller brush with paint, and then I'm going to tap it on the larger brush. Now, just a caution as we start here, this does get messy because paint tends to spatter as we do this, so make sure that you're somewhere where it's not going to be a problem if you get a few extra paint spots out, or you might want to lay down some protective, maybe some plastic underneath where you're drawing, and just make sure you have a lot of room, because this will get a little bit messy. Okay, I've just got white watercolor, and as you can see, I'm just tapping on the edge. Now the key here is you want a variety of sizes of stars, and so you want some kind of bigger and brighter, you want some not so bright, and the way to do that, you control it by 1, the amount of paint you have in the brush, and 2, the amount of water you have in the paint. So if the brush is really full with water, it's going to tend to make bigger stars. If you are using just less water, it's going to tend to make smaller stars. So just simply tapping. These are a little bigger. I've added a little extra water. You can see some of that spatter there, and that's pretty much it. Now we just did that first group of stars in watercolor, and this time we're going to use acrylic. And the reason I use acrylic and watercolor tends to dry not quite as bright. It darkens as it dries, and acrylic will tend to dry brighter, particularly if it's a little thicker. And so if you look at the night sky, you'll see that stars are kind of varying in brightness, and so if you want a realistic feel, using both watercolor and acrylic will give you that. And again, I'm just coming back in and tapping. You can see some of my spatter there. I've got a lot of water. If you want to create kind of a star cluster, then you just tap real fast in the same area for a little while. Notice I changed the angle that I'm holding the brushes at too, so that again, it doesn't all appear to be coming from the same direction. Incidentally, this is why I don't use a toothbrush. Sometimes people or artists will use a toothbrush to create this kind of spatter. I don't like it because it tends to make it more like a spray most of the time. It doesn't give me the look that I'm really wanting. So you just keep coming back in, and again, for bigger stars, you're going to add a little bit more water, but for smaller stars and brighter stars, then you want to have more paint than water. Now, you always want to have a few kind of standout stars, and the way I do that is I use what's called a mahl stick. M-A-H-L is how it's spelled. My first oil painting teacher called it a granny stick, and this is one I made years ago and still use. And what you do with a mahl stick is it's something to rest your wrist on to give you a little bit more control, so you're not shaky. Because what I'm going to do here is I'm dipping into the paint. I'm going to rest my wrist on the stick, and then I'm going to just tap in a bright star, and I'm going to do a few more of these. Now the key here is don't do too many, and spread them out. Do 2 or 3 here and 1 or 2 in another place. And if you look up in the night sky, the stars are not all equally bright, so and you usually just have a few that are standing out really bright. So we don't want to overdo it, because that's going to give it an artificial look. But just come through, add a few big stars. Use a stick. In fact, I'll show you in the next section how to do this if you don't have a mahl stick. So let's move on. Well, we're ready now to actually put the stars in our painting that we've been working on for the last few weeks. Now, to protect the parts where we don't want the stars to show up, I'm just going to lay that sheet of watercolor paper that I used to demonstrate a graded wash on. And I'm going to lay that right over top there so that it protects the rest of the paper. You can use anything, paper towel, one of your dry baby wipes, whatever. And I'm going to come in and start tapping just like I did before. And I'm right now using just regular watercolors. And again, these will tend to mix a little bit with the background, and they're going to dry dimmer, and that's perfectly all right. In fact, I like that because what it does is, again, it gives a variety to the look of stars. The one thing that you want to always make sure when you're doing a starscape is have that variety. Don't just tap in 300 or 400 dots somewhere that all look the same, and resist the temptation to try to draw, I don't know what you really call them, but it's sort of the flare of the star with a point going up and down and to the sides, because you do see that occasionally, but it's usually with a photograph and it's a lens flare. But if you're just looking up into the starry sky, you're not going to see that. So now again, if you want to be creative and do something different and unusual, then you can go ahead. But still going ahead here. Now I'm about to switch to acrylics. These have been watercolors that I'm using, and so I'm going to load my brush up with some acrylic paint at this point. And again, it's going to dry a little brighter so that I will have that variety that I'm looking for. And after a few taps of that, I'm going to get I actually started with a mahl stick, but I'm going to show you in a minute what to do if you don't have a mahl stick. So here I'm going to go ahead and put in a little galaxy, and what I'm doing is, again, I'm using acrylics here, and I'm just going to tap in a little bit of paint, and then I'm going back and getting clear water. And then as I get that clear water, I'm going to come in and just soften. Now, my brush isn't just super wet, but it's clean. It's got clear water, and I don't want that galaxy to stand out just super bright. So as I paint around it a little bit and draw it out, and I'm going to add a little bit more water. And again, what that's going to do, it's going to make it mix a little bit with the dark blue background, so it's going to soften that color, and it's not going to stand out as much, because if you look up in the sky, unless you have a telescope, you're not going to see distant galaxies or nebula or anything like that. So you want to soften that so it's not particularly bright. Okay, now I'm switching over and I'm going to use now the end of a brush, a large brush, and I'm going to use that as sort of a mini maul stick here. And you can just see in the lower left-hand corner the end of the brush that it's my large round brush. And you notice I also just tapped in a really big spot of white, and I don't want that there, so I'm just going in with white, or with the clear water, and softening that. And now let's try adding in a couple of big stars. Not a whole lot. Again, you don't want to overdo this. Just a few dots here and there that are going to stand out above all the other ones and give it that a little bit more of a realistic look. Again, one or two there. And that pretty much does it. We're going to take our cover sheet off there. Now the last thing to do is to take the tape off. And to me it's almost kind of like unwrapping a Christmas present, because I've been looking forward to getting this done. Well, I guess I do add one more thing here. So I'm going to go back in and touch up that galaxy just a bit. And now you can see that brush that I was using as a mini maul stick. And now I believe we're done. So it's time to take the tape off. I'm going to put the brushes aside, make sure they're clean. Of course, the big one is clean because I didn't use it for anything except tapping on, but the small one, make sure it's washed out, especially if you've been using acrylic, because if acrylic dries on the brush, you're not going to get it out. And now we're just going to turn it over. Now when you take the tape off of here, again, this is painter's tape, so it shouldn't damage the paper, but be careful to always pull away from the painting itself. And the reason that I do that is I don't want to take a chance of the paper tearing into what I've painted. So I'm always going to pull kind of up and away from the painting as I take this tape off. Again, I almost never have problems with painter's tape tearing the paper, but it can happen. So I pull up and away just like that. And one more to go. I got a little bit on the back there we got to get off. And almost done. There's the last little piece. I could leave that, but I don't want to. There we go. And then there's one last thing to do. And as you're starting out as an artist, never forget to sign your work, because I always tell people when I sign my chalk drawings, you never know, 100 years from now it might be worth something, so I want my name on it. So I'm going to go ahead and sign that. And that's going to do it. I hope you've enjoyed this project. We'll have a new one next month, and don't forget to have fun.